is to just give you guys some basic information to help you and aid you in your discussion. I will say with complete honesty that as I was, sometimes it takes when you sit down and you're actually writing something to have it hit you hard. And when I was putting this levy presentation together, this is a critical decision for us, and a very important one. And I hope that this aids the board in making that critical decision. That is the intent here. First of all, as Mark said, here's our results from the first attempt, February 9th, 2021. 38.74 eligible voters cast their votes. The yes votes, 9,653, representing 47.53%, and the no votes, 10,658, representing 52.47, a difference of a little over 1,000 votes. It is important to point out, people would like to think that perhaps our district is being greedy by running a levy. That's not the case. 46 districts ran levies on February 9th. 42 of those districts passed. I would encourage anybody to look at the results of those districts. The 4 districts that didn't pass, Battleground was by far the largest district. The second largest district to us had just a little over 1,000 students. The other districts had very small amounts of students. So most large districts pass their levies when they they have the opportunity to. Our levy represents approximately 14% of our budget. It's $30 million, and I had to remind myself, Megan helped me understand this. The levy itself is about 28 million, a little over 28 million, but if we pass the levy, we also get the local effort assistance funds, the LEA funds, which for us is about $1.5, $1.7 million. So the total cost for us in not passing a levy is the loss of approximately $30 million. The levy makes up the difference in what the state doesn't fund. People like to think that a levy is all about extras. It is extras to some degree, but extras that are oftentimes looked at as expectations by the community. For instance, high school athletics, or it's expectations like counselors, or it's expectations like nurses. It's also required things like special ed services. $3.5 million, $3.6 million of our levy comes from special ed services. You can't just cut everything funded by the levy. People would like to think it's that easy. Well, if you don't pass a levy, just cut everything that's not funded by the levy. That's not the case, because again, you have things that you have to have. You have to provide those sped services. So that 3.6 million that you lose from a levy for sped services, if you don't have that, you have to make that up by cutting the other things because you don't have the levy. Nursing services, for instance, we have 12 nurses. The levy only the state funding only pays for 2 of those. You have to have those nurses, or else you're putting yourself in liability. You're not meeting state law, all of those things. The other thing is that levy also includes technology. Imagine where we would be if we didn't have to pass levies to purchase all of the one-to-one devices that we had to use during this remote learning period. As I mentioned already, athletics, maintenance and operations is oftentimes offset. The cost of that is offset by the levy. SEL services for us, which is a high priority and been very successful, funded by that. Again, the point being made is, why do districts run levies? To provide the funding for what the state doesn't pay for, and to meet the expectations of the community and the state, and even unfunded mandates. And I would point out that out of the 295 districts in the state of Washington, 289 of them have current levies in effect. Some of the small districts, less than 100 students, don't have levies. Some of our districts are on Indian territory, Native American territory, and they don't have levies either. But almost all, 96, 97% of districts in Washington use levies. So, as Mark said, what's next for us? We can run the levy one more time between now and the end of the year, 3 possible dates. We can choose April 27th. We can choose August 3rd, or we can choose November 2nd. And so that is the question before the board. Oops, sorry, wrong way. That is the question before the board, which one of those dates? And the timing, I think, is the most critical aspect. And that's why this slide right here, the timing is critical for us. When choosing a date to run the levy again, the most important consideration I would encourage the board is which date gives us the best chance to pass. That is the critical question. Which date would give us the best chance to pass a levy? Running it in April, if we run it in April, the advantage of running it in April is it allows us to plan for next year and possibly avoid cuts to staff and programs. If we run it in August and November, we will require us to make the cuts as we head into the next year because we have to assume that the levy will fail at that point. And so we would have to make all of those cuts. So we would have to make $15 million in cuts going into next year. Now, if the levy were to pass in August or November, we could then possibly make some changes. Obviously, if you pass it in November, you're halfway through the year, it'd be difficult to hire staff, restart programs, do all of that stuff. So that's a consideration. I would point out to the board that in February and election dates, those have the highest passing rates for school levies. August has the lowest. November is about 10 percentage points behind February and April. February is a little over 90%. April is a little less than 90%, and November is about 80%. But the question is, if we run it in April, do we have enough time to change voters' minds? If we run it in April, can we be successful in April? And that's a question the board will have to ask. Surviving a double levy failure. Battleground School District has done it before. It seems like every 10 years, that's something that we go through. I will tell you that it certainly sets you back. It sets you back on your heels. It takes years to recover from a double levy failure. And some of the reasons are, and I'll point this out, just so we're all on the same page, levies operate on a calendar year. That means you're collecting funds from January through December. School budgets operate on a fiscal year, September through August. So there's a little bit of a difference there. We have to remember that this levy would impact the 2022 calendar year. So if we fail it one more time, we won't get any levy funds during the year of 2022. So it would affect the second half of the school year, the January through August portion of the 21-22 school year, and it would affect the first half of the following school year, the 22-23 school year. And we would lose approximately $15 million of cuts in each of those years, including the loss of LEA. So 15 million next year, 15 million the year after. We believe if we look at the budget that we can survive. Now I use that term survival in quotes because I think you have to understand, we can survive. It is going to hurt very, very much. We can survive by using a significant portion of the fund balance. And for those people that might be listening in that think the fund balance is just sitting there, collecting interest, it's not. A lot of that fund balance that we would use has already been designated for specific things that make education in Battleground School District more successful. And I'll point some of those things out, what those cuts might look like in just a second. However, if we have a double levy failure and we go into the second year, that 2022-23 school year, and have to make an additional $15 million of cuts, because we've used most of our, at that point, we will have used most of our fund balance, we will not have money to pull from, and we'll be making significant cuts that will hurt for years to come. And I don't say that as a matter of trying to be dramatic. That is the reality of it. And those of us who have lived through it can attest to it. It will take us years to recover from this. Here's what it looks like the first year. Here's how we can survive the first year. We currently have $2.5 million set aside for curriculum. That was going to purchase our new ELA curriculum. It was going to purchase our new social studies curriculum. It was going to purchase our new health curriculum. It was going to purchase some new curriculum for music. We would use that instead to help offset the cuts that the levy failure. We have money set aside. We took 5 years of $500,000 each because we lost the grant. Remember, our grant ran out that started our SEL programs, and we set that aside. We have used 2 of those years. So we have 1.5 million set aside for SEL services. We could use that next year, still get through next year, fund the 500,000 and use the rest of that 1.5. But moving forward, we would have no funds for SEL. And remember, that's one of the areas that the state doesn't cover. That's an unfunded mandate. Capital improvements. The board wanted to see our buildings get in better shape. They set aside money. That's one of the reasons that we increased the levy rate up to $2.50, hoping that our community would recognize that. We've made a lot of improvements. We have more of that money set aside. We could use that, 1.5 million. We're receiving CARES money from the state. We believe that some of the CARES money we're using, we could redesignate to help fill some of those gaps, and we could approximately use 2 million of the CARES money to help offset some of the loss from the levy. The CAM lease, if we purchase the CAM building using impact fees, we would save $500,000 off of the lease. We could use that money to offset. Middle school sports, we've set aside $500,000 to start middle school sports. We were hoping it was this year. It's not going to be this year. We were hoping it was going to be next year. We could use that money, $500,000. We could cut K-4 supplies. Right now, we pay for all K-4 kids' school supplies. We could cut that. We could cut building budgets by 10%. We give, each building gets a levy allocation, a per child amount of money that we give them when we pass our levy. We could cut that. That would save us $500,000, those 3 things together. We could cut department budgets by 20%. That would save us $2 million. And if the board so chose, they could use $1 million of the minimum fund balance, and they could account for another $1 million there. That would give us $12 million of cuts. That's the best that we can come up with right now. We could find nickel and dime, 5,000 here, 10,000 here, 20,000 here, maybe even up to 50,000 in some areas like substitutes or travel or things like that. But it's not going to amount to anything significant. These are the significant cuts that we can make. I want to point out to everybody listening here that the curriculum, the SEL, the capital improvement, the middle school sports is all coming from fund balance. These are monies that we have saved. They are coming from fund balance. And still, it comes only to $12 million, which means that we need an additional $3 million of cuts. And the only thing left to cut is staff. Just as an example, not saying that this is the way we would operate, just as an example I put together, if you had to make $3 million in cuts and you split it equally between classified staff and certificated, certificated also includes district office staff and building administrators. You would have to cut 26 people on classified and 20 people in certificated to get the $3 million of cuts. By doing all of this, you get your $15 million. But what does the year after look like? You have to remember, in the year after, your curriculum, your SEL, your capital improvement, the CARES money, the middle school sports, all of that is gone. Those were savings that you spent. Those are now gone. Those funds have been spent. Those accounted for $8 million in cuts. Going into the second year, those cuts would need to be found somewhere else. If you just split it in terms of people, because people is your biggest cost in this district, it amounts to about 80% of our cost. If you just split it between classified and certificated, you're looking at $4 million in classified costs. You're looking in $4 million in certificated costs. And again, certificated includes building principals. and it includes district office staff. You would have to cut 67 additional people. That's plus the 26 you cut the year before from classified, and 53 additional certificated people. That's plus the 20 that you cut from the previous year. So now you're down 93 classified staff, and you're down 73 certificated staff. Most likely these cuts would have to be would include district office staff, assistant principals, counselors, prevention intervention specialists, security, crossing guards, grounds and maintenance, high school athletics and activities. And you might even have to, if depending on what you can do, you might even have to look at the alternative programs and make some significant cuts there. Might even have to close an alternative program. And then, in addition to that, if you don't want to make all of these cuts, you would have to use all or most of the remaining fund balance. That's the fund balance, that's the unrestricted. There will be fund balance left, but that's restricted fund balance that can only be used for certain things like CTE or LAP funding or federal programs or ASB or inventory that's in supplies and stuff. So that's not money that you can access. So when people talk about this $20 million in fund balance, it's not $20 million. It's closer to about $15 million in fund balance. And by the end of the second year, you've used it all up. Plus, you've made significant cuts. It is important to note that any staff cuts that we make, those 93 classified staff and those 73 certificated staff, that's in addition to any staff cuts that we need to make to offset the enrollment loss that we've had. We've got a loss of over 1,000 students that we have to make cuts for this year because we have to put our budget together based off of current enrollment. I think you've probably gotten this from my tone and the message. It is critical that we pass our next levy attempt. A double levy loss will set us back years. The most critical decision for the board is not to pick a date to rush this to see that perhaps we can avoid making those cuts next year. But the most critical decision for the board is pick the best date that gives us the best chance we have to pass the levy. That's what's in front of you. Questions?
Mr. Waters, can you go back to the slide that says year one? First year. Yeah, so I just want to clarify. So these are cuts that if we did not run the levy in April and we waited until August or November, we would have to make these cuts because we would have to go into the year making these cuts.
Yeah, I would point out the good news is we would have to access this money to use it to support us. If in November we did pass the levy, we could then designate the money to go back into the 2.5 can go back into the curriculum. The 1.5 can go back into the SEL. The capital improvement money, the 1.5 can go back there. The board can take back the minimum fund balance so we can keep that stuff. If it doesn't pass though, we would be using it. We would plan for it. We would have to plan for it thinking that it wouldn't pass.
Right. So when you go to the next slide, the second year, again, to clarify, the second year is if we ran it in April and it failed, that'd be a double failure. You couldn't run it until 2022. No, if you ran it in August, or if you ran it in November and you failed, that's a double levy.
If we fail it one more time, as Mark's pointing out, thank you, Mark, for the emphasis there. If we fail it one more time this year, this is what we are facing. We're facing the second year. We will be in the second year. And that's why I reiterate again, the most critical thing is that third bullet there. Pick a date not based on next year. Pick a date based on the best chance we have to pass the levy.
Thank you.